changes.
What's up, Wastelanders? Today I want to talk about 5 things how I think Fallout 76 could still improve according to my own ideas and experience with the game thus far as it currently stands. These will be a mix of both big and small things, but before I get started, I think it's important to briefly understand how the game got to where it is and what it's been through. Fallout 76 was released on November 14th, 2018, a little more than a year before we all had to begin changing the way we live due to COVID-19. This was the year that the West Virginian wasteland existed without human life other than the 500 occupants that were released from Vault 76 on Reclamation Day to rebuild the world after the Great War ended. It was Vault 76 that was supposed to bring life back to the wasteland, because there wasn't any. It was within this first year that Bethesda still worked in office, patching, fixing bugs, producing content for the Atom Store, and more. Wild Appalachia and Nuclear Winter were also updates added to the game during this time. Then early in 2020, things changed in real life as we entered a global pandemic that affected us all in some way or another. Bethesda began to work from home, as many of us had to protect and maintain a standard of health. This of course brings up many issues like equipment needs, access, or network connections and speed issues, as staff would now not be directly connected to their internal office networks, but having to instead go through their middleman home connections, which would cause many other unforeseen issues. In other words, many of us worldwide, if possible, or were lucky enough, have had to switch to working from home where that was not a regular situation and where companies were most likely not readily prepared for. And yet, early in the pandemic, the Wastelanders update was still released on April 14th, 2020. Furthermore, at some time during all of this, as projects settle into a comfortable state and other projects start, Fallout 76 was left with a small handful of a dev team to uphold and maintain this game. Not to mention that we, the public that continue to play this game and submit bug reports, do outnumber them heavily, which makes it harder for them to keep up with us. And when it couldn't get worse, at the Texas Bethesda branch where Fallout 76 was developed and is maintained, has recently also suffered the worst winter ever. The state suffered the worst power outages ever seen. People suffered freezing temperatures, lost homes, and worse yet, also lost lives. And let's not forget, the pandemic is still happening. Pretty safe to say, work and life conditions have not been easy for many of us. And despite all the difficulties happening in the real world, Bethesda still put out seasonal scoreboards, new Atom Store content, fixes, and more. And though this game has received much unjustifiable criticism prior to day one, and a rough start, those of us that have been around since beta have seen this game dramatically improve over its less than easy existence. But it's also important to always have an open mind and understand that there will always be room for improvement with anything in life. So without further ado, let's get started with the 5 things I think Fallout 76 could improve in. Number 1. More DLCs. Everyone that's played a Fallout game has also played Fallout DLC, and if you haven't, you may want to go back and do so because you're missing out. Fallout 3 had 5 DLCs, and they ranged anywhere with an average of 2 to 5 hours to complete. Operation Anchorage, which was 2 to 3 hours, The Pit, which was 4 to 5 hours, Broken Steel, which was 5 hours, Point Lookout, which was 3 to 4 hours, and Mothership Zeta, which was 3 hours. Then there was Fallout New Vegas, which was developed by Obsidian Studios under Bethesda's observation, and it had only 4 DLCs that ranged anywhere from 3 to 6.5 hours. Dead Money was 5 hours, Honest Hearts was 3 hours, Old World Blues was 6.5 hours, and Lonesome Road was 4 hours. Then there was Fallout 4, which had more DLC content released than the previous games. However, 3 of which I would only really consider as add-ons, as they don't actually provide any additional story or time-consuming events. That brings it back down to 4 actual DLCs ranging anywhere from 3 to 17 hours to complete. Automatron was 3 to 4 hours. Wasteland Workshop was just an add-on. Far Harbor was 17 hours to complete. Contraptions Workshop was only 30 minutes, so I'll consider that an add-on. Vault-tec Workshop was 3 hours to complete. Nuka World was 12 hours to complete. And then there was the High Resolution Texture Pack, which was just an add-on. That brings us to Fallout 76. And though we've seen a few things already, like Wild Appalachia or Nuclear Winter, but these were additional modes, so let's only focus on what we consider traditional DLC, which only affects the main game. So far, we only have Steel Dawn, which is 4.5 hours to complete, but we are expecting to see Fractured Steel release sometime in the near future. Then there's the Wastelanders update, which to me sits in an odd position because it is DLC, but it's also an extension onto the main storyline. And I say this because the Wastelanders update was more of a correction made to the entire game, and new players won't ever get to experience what it was prior to this update. Regardless, Wastelanders adds an average of 10 extra hours, making the main storyline of the game 36 hours to complete. But Wastelanders not only added more time onto the main storyline, it brought many little stories as human life returned to the hills of West Virginia's Appalachia territory. But of course, these aren't being considered here for various reasons. Mainly the stories are too small to be considered individual DLC, and the Wastelanders Wastelanders' story is focused more on the main storyline. But we should realize, main storyline aside, the Wastelanders update did bring a lot to the game. But I think Fallout 76 being as big as it is and covering such a large area would do well and benefit from even more elaborate DLC content. I'm willing to bet that fans would heavily enjoy more story-driven DLC full of lore, characters, and morally dividing choices causing varying outcomes and rewards. With everything this game has brought, like the cryptids for example, there are lots of possibilities for new additional DLC content on top of what may already exist or prelude to in the game currently. Number 2. Better menu controls. Okay, DLCs in number 1 is a pretty big item, but these aren't being talked about in any particular order. So let's quickly talk about a little thing I think could have been added in recently in a previous update. Not too long ago, Bethesda released a quality of life update that made things a little easier for us players. This update added a few nice organizational features that separated armor from clothing, aid from food and drink, stacked weights, stash size increase, and a few other things. And though these were great and a noticeable improvement, I feel like there could have been a few additional things that could have been added as part of this update that may have been overlooked. For one, a collect or remove all feature would have been nice when looting. Though many players are most likely going through and picking out the necessary or more desirable items, I found that there are also situations in which I just want to grab everything and go. The trouble with this is that there's no remove or collect all option when looting, so I'm having to loot every item from enemies or a container one by one. Though this option could and should be applied everywhere, one of the more noticeable examples would be the scrap bot at your camp. After days of adventuring, grinding, or mission running, this guy can collect a fair share of scrap. And though it doesn't necessarily take too long to click everything out one by one, you can't argue that a one-click remove all wouldn't be better. As someone who uses guns in the games, the ammo converter is an awesome feature. However, the ammo converter menu is also less than desirable. With 3 options to buy or sell up to 10, hundreds, or thousands of ammo at a time, it gets rather repetitive when you have tons of ammo in your inventory. And it gets even more frustrating when you can't even see how much ammo you have in your inventory to know how much you have to sell or want to convert. This is another menu that definitely could be improved to something that allows players to quickly get through what they need to do instead of spending so much time on a frustrating process when you can't even sell ammo anywhere else other than your camp's vending machine. Then there's cooking. You have to craft food and drink one item at a time. This could vastly be improved if you have the necessary items in order to craft however many you need to be able to select that amount and then just craft that entire amount instead of going one by one by one. It's very time consuming, it takes quite a while, and this I think is another menu that could be improved. So overall, I think there's quite a number of menus in the game that could be revisited and vastly improved in order to make things a little bit faster and easier on the player. Number 3, Creative Camp Mode. Something I think would be a lot of fun, and I think a lot of the community would agree with, is a creative mode specifically for camp building on the main map. I see tons of amazing and creative camp builds from so many players across the globe on Twitter. Some of the camps are very impressive to see what's possible with the camp system and keeps me wanting to redesign and build and test and push my own skills at camp building. My problem that many may share is that I don't have all the plans or the materials to ever accomplish such creative builds that I'd actually like to create. However, with a creative mode, not only would it be fun, but also very useful. It could allow me to build anywhere on the map, to be able to see what's possible or not in various locations without having to make the commitment you'd have to in survival. Sometimes moving your camp to a location you thought would be a good one, only to find out that building your idea wasn't possible or as simple as you thought, isn't the greatest feeling. A creative mode of course would still have to follow camp building budgets so that players would know where their limits are and in being able to replicate their builds later in a main survival mode without being disillusioned with false or inaccurate budgets. And with access to all available camp items, it would allow players to build freely, but also allow them to see what plans they would need to work for if using items they have not yet found or earned in order to replicate their creative builds. Enemies would also be active so that players would be able to test out camp builds that are designed for loot farming from enemies without fear of destruction or lack of safety to their own lives. A creative mode would just be fun for camp building. I can't say enough that the creative side of the Fallout community is a talented bunch with this system, and I think everyone would really just enjoy to build camps free from lack of materials and plans. Number 4, playable perk cards. Something I thought that was very fun in Fallout New Vegas was the playing card game Caravan. So when I heard that the perk system in Fallout 76 was going to be card-based, there was a part of me that was hoping for that extra use aside from just being for perks. Nothing would change in the aspect as it currently stands. Perk cards in Fallout 76 would still be earned through leveling. We know that they're currently set up like packs of baseball cards with a piece of bubblegum and a joke. That's fun and all, but imagine if perk cards had some alternative value. Imagine being able to trade or bet them in a card game of sorts. What if every perk card had an alternative purpose with a value that could be used for attack or defense? Which which could be played in a card match like Caravan, Gwent, or Legends. Before or after a match, both players would set up 3 to 5 cards that they would be willing to give away. Whoever wins that match gets to keep the cards that they pick, and the loser of course doesn't. We won't get into logistics of how an actual card game would be played, but the idea is there. I think this would be a fun little addition to the game, though it would be more like a minigame of sorts. Ultimately, I don't know how well this would work. There would need to be a lot of logistics thought out around this, like random mob attacks and player safety for example, or if it would just be an annoyance of chasing players down to play cards, but it's an idea. What do you think of this? Number 5. More lore, story, moral-driven quests and missions. Fallout 76 does have a lot of quests and missions, but because it's an online game, it can be rather grindy at times, especially if all you focus on is the repeatable missions and events. Something that could use more of a focus is the implementation of even more story and lore-driven missions, quests, and events. And I'm not talking about more straightforward scavenger quests because the game has far too many of those as it is. I'm talking about adding in more situations that put the player in a hard position of questioning their own moral code, character, or that of their role-playing persona. Don't get me wrong, this game has plenty of fun quests and missions, but one can only take so many fetch quests from Rose before you start feeling like she's that one friend that only is friends with you because you do anything she says. It's always, I'll give you what you need if you get me what I need first. Give the player more purpose than simply rescuing a lost friend in a cave or retrieving an item from a building. Some of the most enjoyable quests are often the ones that put the character in a really difficult situation that ultimately leads them down a path of ultimate destruction or savior of the wastes. With so many different factions in the game and the introduction of so many fascinating cryptids, I feel like there's more potential for a lot more quests with story and lore, and especially ones that contain multiple outcomes based on the decisions you make. Not to mention that this being an online game, this could have introduced the ability of selectable races, with their own multitude of main storylines, missions, quests, and so on, but that honestly could be its own category in its own right. Now some of these things may sound a bit similar to the DLC section, but the DLCs on their own right should contain all of these things as additional content. What we're talking about here is more to the base game in general. Now don't get me wrong, this game is fun, and I've seen this game at its worst. I do still frequently play, and I enjoy it very much, but it's also important to acknowledge that nothing is ever perfect. And that's okay too. Like most things you'll find in life, there's always room for improvement. The 5 things I've mentioned in this video are in no way meant to shame or bring down the quality of this game as it stands today, but rather as a platform for constructive criticism in areas that I personally think or have noticed where improvements could be made. So if you have any positive or constructive ideas yourself, let me know down in the comments field below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas too. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, as it will also help me to push my video out to more of the Fallout community across YouTube. And if you subscribe too, then you have my deepest appreciation and I thank you. Don't forget to also check out the description of this video where you can find links to my Extra Life fundraising page where you can help me save the lives of kids with cancer and other severe illnesses. There's also a link to my Discord community and a lot more. If you've made it this far, include hashtag Quantum Warrior in your comment. Stay safe in the wasteland, and I'll see you all in the next episode.